Set deep into the ancient stone walls of Vatican City is a 53-foot iron gate. When a train approaches, this heavy barrier takes nearly a minute to slide open, granting access to a sovereign nation. Vatican City is physically smaller than many American golf courses, yet it maintains its own dedicated, fully functional national railway system. The entire line runs for just 1,000 feet, but pushing those tracks through one of the most historically dense cities on Earth made this the most expensive railway per foot of track ever constructed. Construction on this scale was a massive commitment for such a small territory. This 1,000 feet of track served as a physical loophole, an engineering answer to a geopolitical problem that had paralyzed the Church for decades. For centuries, the Catholic Church governed a massive swath of central Italy known as the Papal States. That arrangement held until the 1860s, when an expanding Italian military consolidated the peninsula into a single nation. Facing the loss of their territory, the Pope withdrew behind the walled 110-acre Vatican complex on the west bank of the Tiber River and refused to recognize the new Italian government. This triggered a tense 59-year diplomatic standoff. Successive popes maintained this exact posture, living as self-imposed prisoners inside their own compound. Those defensive barriers succeeded in keeping the Italian military out. However, they also severed the Church from the modern global supply chain, leaving them without domestic food production or a reliable fuel source. The deadlock broke in 1929. The Vatican signed a treaty with Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini that recognized Vatican City as a fully independent state. Within that founding document was a highly specific physical requirement. Italy formally agreed to construct a new railway station inside the Vatican walls and connect it to the broader Italian network. The logic was strictly practical. A tiny nation with no farmland or heavy industry relies entirely on its neighbor for its survival. If Italy controlled every truck crossing the border, the Vatican wouldn't truly be sovereign. This rail link was the ultimate sovereignty solution. It allowed the world's smallest nation to supply its people and move its leaders without ever having to set foot on Italian soil. Following the treaty, construction crews had just 9 months to complete the project. To clear a path for the tracks, engineers had to demolish centuries-old buildings sitting on both sides of the border. Because the site for the terminal sat lower than the Italian station, workers hauled in massive amounts of earth to level the ground. They constructed a colossal 8-arch masonry viaduct just to reach the Vatican walls. Since the Italian government financed the construction, Mussolini used the opportunity to leave his mark. You can still see the emblems of his fascist state carved directly into the finished stonework. The final engineering hurdle required workers to physically bore through the thick defensive stones of the Vatican wall itself to admit the new iron tracks. Tearing down historic structures and piercing ancient fortifications proved how much the Vatican needed this connection. It was the only way to ensure their physical link to the outside world. Architect Giuseppe Momo designed the terminal to reflect its surroundings. Built from white marble, it featured a central hall with dedicated waiting rooms for visiting diplomats and high-ranking church dignitaries. Operating an international border within a 1,000-foot rail yard created some unique logistics. Despite crossing a sovereign boundary, there were no customs inspections or import duties collected in either direction. To receive goods, a small Italian shunting engine parked permanently outside the walls. It detached incoming freight wagons from the main line and pushed them through the gate, one car at a time. Inside the Vatican, this flow of fuel, mail, and food was managed almost entirely by one man. Appointed in 1940, Michel Rich served as the head of the cargo office, coordinating every movement through the yard. With an average of just one freight train arriving per day, the material survival of the world's smallest nation rested on the shoulders of one worker and a single daily delivery. Channeling an entire supply chain through a single narrow entry point created a severe vulnerability. As the Second World War began, the danger of that bottleneck became obvious. In 1938, a large fire broke out in a warehouse situated immediately next to 14 loaded gasoline tankers. Vatican firemen narrowly managed to extinguish the blaze before it reached the fuel supply, avoiding a massive explosion. 5 years later, an unidentified aircraft dropped 5 bombs near the station. One detonated so close to the terminal that it shattered the windows of St. Peter's Basilica. To this day, no country has officially claimed responsibility for the strike. The ultimate nightmare arrived in late 1944. During Allied bombing campaigns, Vatican officials discovered a heavily armed Nazi munitions train parked directly on their neutral tracks. The railway, built to guarantee the Vatican's safety, had temporarily transformed into a magnet for wartime danger. By the 1960s, the world was modernizing. The rise of flexible road freight and commercial air travel made the localized rail connection less essential for daily logistics. There was a rare exception in 1962 when Pope John XXIII decided to travel by rail. Because the Vatican's own dedicated coach had sat unused for so long it was unserviceable, he had to borrow a personal train from the Italian president. Following that journey, traffic slowed to a crawl. The grand waiting rooms for diplomats sat empty, and the terminal building was eventually converted into a duty-free shop for Vatican employees. The world's most vital geopolitical loophole had quietly devolved into a relic of a bygone era. In 2015, the Vatican Museum partnered with the Italian National Railway to reactivate the dormant line. They launched a weekly public passenger service connecting the historic station to the Pope's summer palace south of Rome. Every Saturday, visitors can ride this route. The journey inside Vatican territory covers just 300 meters and takes the train approximately 30 seconds to cross the border. Today, that brief ride stands as a monument to a different time. It represents a moment when a church had to move mountains and pierce ancient walls just to secure its right to exist.